All right. It's already 6:33. We're going to get started. This program, as you can see on the screen here at the bottom, it says it's made possible by a LePage Center grant. So we are really excited that there's a four-part Zoom series. This is number two. If you go to our website, you can see all the other ones listed now. And it's funded by a grant from Villanova University through their LePage Center for History in the Public Interest. the we were trying to build on the success of our Roebling road trip program that we used to do. Well, we still do. It's not, you can also find those on our YouTube. And that was more focused on engineers and historians coming to talk about, Roebling historic sites. Whereas this one, we're really trying to like look inward and focus on Roebling itself and share some of the new research we've been doing and also share a lot of the stories we've been learning from people from Roebling. And I'm seeing a bunch of you guys showing up in the chat, which is so amazing because every time we do something like this, we learn even more about Roebling and company towns in general. So it's fantastic. One of the reasons we started to do this program and sort of made that little shift and applied for this grant was because we've been doing some in-person programs after COVID, a lot more in-person programs, and some of them became really popular. So the last program we did with this Zoom was a version of our walking tour, but online, because we had a bunch of people who were saying, I can't walk that far, or it's always raining when I try to show up, or I live in Colorado now. So we decided to make a version of it for people who are tuning in online. And now this is based on a series of programs we did last year in, I want to say it was September and October. We were able to bring people into the Roebling Rowhouse that we've purchased. You'll hear more about it later, to just sort of bring people in and talk about what we've learned in our research. Also something you'll hear more about. Um, Okay. I was really just sort of stalling so that more people would log in, but we're looking good. So I'm going to get really, really started. And I do want to say as a disclaimer before we begin that the program based on this that we did in real life, it was an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we're not going to do that tonight. This is going to be in some ways, well, it's going to be a different program, but in some ways, we'll be able to get deeper and see more images and archival documents that aren't really usually seen. But you won't be standing in the house. So there's pros and cons to doing it this way, but we're hoping that it'll get you excited about coming to visit the house once we do have it open and ready. And before you ask, we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube channel, along with all of our other programs. We usually send out an email and post on social media once it's ready and available. So the way that this is going to run tonight, I'm going to go through an amazing presentation. Um, you're going to submit questions while I'm talking. So if anything comes to you, or you can do that in the chat, just submit anything that you're thinking about or reactions to photos. And we have Madison, can Madison say hi? Madison can't say
Hi
hi.
guys, I
There
can't
she
if I
is.
find the button. Hi everyone.
Madison is going to be managing the questions in the chat. And then afterwards, we're going to do Q&A with everybody. So with that being said, my screen will work. Okay, so this is a lot of writing on the screen. You don't really need to read it, but I just wanted to start explaining how much work we've done to this point. So in 2020, we bought a house in Roebling. It's 101 Second Avenue. And you can see there's a little button here. It's not really a button. You can't click it and donate, but you could donate on our website if you're interested. We bought the house. It wasn't given to us, so we do have a mortgage on the house, and we've been renting it. So the house on the inside, it's been completely flipped in the 2000s. So we weren't really precious. It wasn't a time capsule. It wasn't, frozen in the 1930s or anything. So while we were doing all this other stuff I'm about to mention to you, we've had some renters in there making use of the property. The first thing that we were able to start with is called an incubation grant. So this is funded by the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. And it was really we brought in some consultants who do a lot of community-based historic site work, and our goal was to find ways to get members of the community to um, get involved, get excited about the house, start sharing their family's history if they have any artifacts, things like that. So we came up with like large scale fun event ideas and programs that not that trick people into being interested in history, but do trick people. So the audio tours that we just announced recently, that was an idea out of this grant. We tried to do a block party, that was an idea out of this grant. So there were really, really good ideas that a lot of which we've implemented. One of them is doing a targeted collecting campaign and building relationships in town. So that was the next thing on here. In 2022, we started offering regular walking tours every Saturday. If you haven't been, you should definitely come. We have a lot of fun on those. But the walking tours were really sort of an excuse to start talking to visitors, seeing what their questions are about like the physical landscape. We have all of the houses from the original company town. Only one building is missing. So that's like really, really, really rare. That's the thing we have that other people don't have. So we wanted to get people out into that space. 2022, we did our Roebling Works exhibit that many of you have come to see. And that again was a really good opportunity to start talking to people from the community and collecting more and more stories. And then there's a couple of other things on here. Most recently, we did a preservation plan, which was funded by the New Jersey Historic Trust. And that is a document that not only sort of does a deep dive into who lived in your structure and how it was used, they kind of do the whole historic context, like why is Roebling important? But then they go through and explain how to restore the structure to the time period that you desire. So still have a little bit of sticker shock looking at the cost of restoring our porch, etc. But that document is so important for us figuring out what our next steps are. And see if this animation works. Not working. Why isn't it working? There you go. So again, all of these are either federally or state funded projects. And we'll see what happens with those next. So here we go. Here she is. This is the on the left, you can see the house and you'll see in greater detail, but this is an example of the walking tours that we had been doing. And basically we have this wonderful clipboard that has a stop sign on the back. And I use that to direct traffic. So busy in Roebling. And we walk around town, it's super, people are engaged, they ask questions, it's casual, it's fun, but we're also hearing about stories of people who lived in town. This here is a little bit of a peek at the program that we did when we did have access to the house. So you can see me standing in the threshold that's inside of the Roebling Rowhouse. And you can see it doesn't look like it's 1930. It doesn't look like it's really any time in there. But we had it all set up and invited people in. I was going to say every weekend, but it was more than that for those 2 months to hear people's responses to what we've been learning and what we've been doing and just the space in general. So again, here she is in greater detail. We have an artist's rendering on the left, which I love. And if you look really closely, there's a cat in the upstairs window. Darling. And this is also based on the other side, which is a historic postcard produced by the company. So this postcard is labeled, it says Second Avenue, and like it is the house that we purchased. You can see how tiny these trees are. They're much bigger now. But one of my board members, bless her heart, pointed out to me that the postcard, I don't know if you can see my cursor, the postcard has this little circle vent at the top of the peak, where our house does not. And we figured out that the company had actually labeled the postcard wrong. And this is a house on Third Avenue. I don't think any of you would have known that. I mean, some of you have eagle eyes here, but really disappointing. But luckily, it's the same structure. It's like a cookie cutter representation of the house. So we can still use it, I think. And here is, I made up a fake Zillow for us. So if any of you are familiar with the program, the website Zillow, you can go and check out real estate there. And usually on my walking tours, people say, how much are these houses going for? And I decline to answer because A, I don't know the price of every house in town. Why would I? But also, at any point, any of you can look up Roebling on Zillow and if any of the houses are for sale, you can click through and see what the insides of the homes look like. And it's interesting because there's the row houses we're going to talk about today, but there's also twin houses all the way up to mansions. So you can get a good sense of what they look like in the interior. You can snoop around in other people's houses using Zillow. So these are the stats, these are the Zillow stats for our house. It is 2 bed, 1 bath, about 1,200 square feet. So it's kind of a traditional row house. And for those who are real Roebling diehard enthusiasts, this photo and almost all of these postcards came from Lou Borby, longtime local historian. Um, and he would be the first one to point out that this is definitely not our house. This is actually, I believe, Third Avenue, not Second Avenue. And in the distance here, you can see the water tower that was at the center of town. I think. Someone please correct me on that. But one of the things we've been doing recently is um, trying to figure out, we talk about the Roebling Row House like it's special. But in a lot of ways, Roebling is a town of row houses. So all of these yellow blobs that you're seeing are the row houses in town. This is this is a map from 1919. It's like an insurance map. And I picked 1919 because these houses on the right and the ones at the bottom, these banks of houses, the bottom, those weren't built until after World War One. And I wanted to make sure that our map had those because they are all row houses. Um, some of the houses on 8th Avenue all the way to your left were also built after 1918. And there's this yellow stripe all the way at the bottom. There are now row houses there. They were built while it was still a company town, but after 1919. So all in all, I counted one by one these little pink rectangles. There are 368 row houses on this map, and then only 111 of the twins. And in terms of the mansions, only 2 of them are built at this point in 1919, but now today there's 4. Those are at the top of the screen up by the river. So this really is a whole town of row houses, but there's different kinds of row houses. This is a terrible photo. This is going to be the worst one you see. This I just got from Google Street View. I call these the big ones because guess what? They're the biggest. These are 3-story row houses. And they were, as you can see at the bottom here, 6 or 7 bedrooms, 2 baths. That's a huge, huge house, especially for Roebling, I think. And but there's only 8 of these in town. These are on 4th Avenue. Then we have these ones, which were part of that the housing built after World War One. So these ones are the smallest ones that we've been able to locate. So they're 2 bedroom, 1 bath, about 975 square feet. So the reason I say about is sometimes the corner houses have a little more space than the ones in the interior of the row. So about. So these ones have, I think this is the trolley tracks right in the foreground here. It's a really interesting postcard to take a look at. Then we've got these ones over on Railroad and Amboy Avenue, which sometimes is referred to as the other side of the tracks, but a lot of the row houses are on the other side of the tracks. So these ones are mainly 3 bedroom, 1 bath, and about 1,100 square feet. And then we've got, let me see. Okay, so what's complicated about this, and if you read or have heard me talk about the Roebling Row House in general, is that I talk about how it was the housing for the lowest paid laborers. But so a lot of the row houses, the one that we have is on Second Avenue, right up against the steel mill. once you get all the way to 8th Avenue, the furthest you can basically go away from the steel mill, so 7th and 8th, they're also row houses. So these are some of those row houses. They have a totally different architectural style, as you can see. This one has this beautiful arch in the back. A lot of those have been bricked up today, but it's still a row house, and it's still roughly the same square footage. It's just that Second Avenue and the other ones that we took a look at, those were for African American and mainly immigrant laborers, where these ones were for Americans and hold on, Americans and Swedish immigrants and people who were typically thought of as being English speaking workers. They were definitely paid more. Um, so one example is we know there's a guy who lives on 8th Avenue, and in the 1940 census, it lists how much you were paid for the year 1939. He made $2,400. He was a pipe fitter, so he had a pretty good job. And then the guy who lived in our house at 101 Second Avenue made $1,000. And they worked the same amount of weeks, but it was just like a drastic difference between um, their pay and what the work they were doing. So this is another photo. It was taken from on top of the school, but it gives you a sense of these 8th Avenue row houses. They're right on a park, which is like the baseball field, but you can see some smokestacks and stuff in the back. Like that's how far the steel mill is away from these houses. Okay, now we're going to get into the good stuff. So I promised that we would do some behind the scenes. You guys would get to see sort of the process of the things that we've been learning about the row houses as we go. So this, and you don't really have to read this whole thing, I'm going to talk about it, but there's an article written. It was written basically the way that it reads is like something out of the press office from the Roebling company, like promoting their new town. This is 1908. Roebling was only founded in 1905. So it's like, rah, 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 we're doing company town. It's great. And so, but it wasn't published in a Roebling publication. It's published in this like an industrial magazine for other people who work and own steel mills, if you believe it. Yeah, I've read those. So here, this is only about the house on Second Avenue, or that type of row house. And it says, in the village at present, there are 10 types of houses, all constructed of brick with slate roofs in the most substantial manner and fitted with the modern conveniences. So what is worth noting, and I made a note to myself to not forget to tell you guys this, is even the lowest paid laborers' houses, like the worst houses in town, they had indoor plumbing on day one. So they didn't have electricity, they didn't have hot water, but they had running water and they had real toilets. So like pull chain toilets, not outhouses, which would have been a really big deal in 1905, 1908, probably all the way up through the 1930s and 40s. So that's that's a pro for living in a company town, this were a company town. Um, they referred to the place where the toilet was as the toilet shed, which we have learned more and more about. But in this article, it continues to say that these houses, the one like 101 Second Avenue that we own, were primarily occupied by foreign laborers, and they name Hungarians and Slavs. And then, because I get this question every week when I do the walking tour, and I haven't looked it up, but I did. I looked it up for you guys. People are always asking me who the architects are because when you go to a historic house museum or do a house tour, it's usually because you're looking at a rich person's house that actually had an architect who built their home. It's custom, one of a kind, really expensive. But in this case, that's not the answer that you're going to get. So they didn't hire some fancy architect out of Trenton or Philly. They hired Roebling employees, so architects and engineers, or engineers that were already on the payroll. So here you can see um, Isaac Harby. That was his name. So I got to remember that every week. Isaac Harby built these, and he was assisted by C.S. Arms. And I have a post-it on my computer at work that says, make a family tree. Like, go on Ancestry, look these guys up. They're probably not the kinds of workers who, have biographies out there about them. So it might be harder to find info, but if any of you are interested, you can make that tree and let me know. Hopefully some of you are doing it right now. So one of the things that you normally hear about when you go to a historic house museum is the people who lived in that house. So you're hearing about what, like, the richest guy in town, the founder of the town, George Washington, something like that. But we are in a really interesting position because I just showed you there's like 300 row houses. There's more than 100 that look exactly like the one that we have. So we are toying with the idea of telling more than just the stories of the people that we can physically locate as renting this individual unit at 101 Second Avenue. But of course, I looked up and found out who lived in our individual home. So I'm going to go through those pretty quickly. In the 1910 census, so all of this is based on census information. You get a little glimpse every 10 years of who's living there. So we have the Dare family. That's not Thunder. I thought it was Joey Thunder for a while, but it's Joseph Dare. One of our volunteers' wife speaks Hungarian, and she's been helping me with my pronunciation, but it could always be better. So Joseph, Annie, John, and Mary are living in the house, and at least one person in your household needs to work at the mill in order to qualify to live in the company housing. And you can see that they are from Austria-Hungary because this is before World War I, and that's still what they were calling it at that time. And you can see at the bottom where it says work. In a lot of cases, people at this position, their title is just laborer. They don't have there's no more description. It's just laborer, means they could be really anywhere at the mill that needs general labor. We don't have a lot of information about these people, and specifically the head of household, Joseph, dies in 1917. So they don't stay in town. We don't really hear a lot more about them. So I just included this image of a rent book. And this is what the employees would have been using with the company to track that they're paying their rent on time. We have a couple of them now. If you have any, let me know. So 1950, 1920, we have the Butch family. This is the largest family that we have record of living in the house. So there's Martin, Anna, Mary, Martin, George, Stephen, James, and Anna. And these are all, like, these aren't borders or anything. That's the entire family. So that's 8 people living in a 2-bedroom house. And it says here that they are from Hungary again. And then for work, they're listed as wire mill, housewife, and scholar. I love scholar. That's such a nice way of saying it. So these folks, we do know a lot more about their family because they did stay in town. As you can see from this document on your right, this is for Martin. He's a child at the time that the census was taken. Martin Butch. That helps you to figure out the pronunciation that it says Butch on the draft card here, but it also says that he's living at 142 3rd Avenue. So he's left 101 2nd Avenue, moved over to 3rd. They're eventually on 4th. Family marries other families. So there's still people in town living in Roebling houses, which is great. Then we have the Och family. So there's George, Elizabeth, George Jr., and Garber. And this one really gave me the biggest headache in a good way. I don't mean that in a bad way. When I was doing the family tree on Ancestry, because the name ACS, that word, actually means carpenter in Hungarian. So when I'm following George Jr., he changes his name to George Carpenter. So we kind of lose him. I'm finding a guy named George Carpenter that's coming up in my hints, like, who's this guy? It wasn't until I really did some deep digging that I figured out that he, like, literally translated that last name and changed it. So again, they're from Hungary, labor, wireworks, and this is an image from a family tree that I found on Ancestry and I'm using with permission of the family. One thing to note is that the 1930 census says how much the rent was. So in 1930, we know the rent was $13 for 2 bedrooms. We don't know what the pay was, though. Look at that mustache. Okay, and then we have this surprise. So when we considered buying the house, I got up on my soapbox and said, doesn't matter who the workers were that lived in the house, their stories are important. Let's just buy it. We just, assumed that there would be workers. We could figure out it. We could tell a good story. We didn't know at that time that our house was used by the Red Cross during the Great Depression to give out food, clothing, etc. It was a relief center. So the company or I doubt they rented it to the Red Cross. I hope they didn't. I don't have any proof of that. They probably just let them use it, I hope. And it was operated by Mrs. Clara Lippincott, who was a Roebling resident who lived around the corner. I did a family tree on her too. There's a lot of Lippincotts though. So it's hard to figure out who's who. But when I was working on our audio tours, I started to hear through our oral history interviews a lot of the women who we did these recordings with in the early 2000s talking about the poorhouse. Sometimes they call it the relief house or the welfare house, but they're all mentioning it's on Second Avenue. So you can see here's some transcripts kind of telling you we have a Hungarian woman, Slovak woman, an African American woman, another Slovak woman. It's interesting to note that Black people were able to access this at the time, but they start talking about like canned food, coal, onions, flour, sugar, um, flour and potatoes, all kinds of stuff they were providing for the workers. And the dates on here, so I think we all know, maybe we do, that the Great Depression started in 1929, but it's really interesting. It kind of didn't hit Roebling too hard until the early 30s. If you think about the bridges that they were building, so they had the George Washington Bridge, and that basically was wrapping up by 1932. And then they got the Golden Gate Bridge account. So in between was the worst dip in hours and work to do at the mill. But so that's why the date of 1937 is kind of not entirely stable. We just know that the next renters moved in 1937. So hopefully we can learn some more about that. But this is the Shees family. So the Shees family moves in 1937 and they live there through the 2000s. So this, if we were going to just do the families who lived in the house, this would be our family. We, as you can see in this photo, this is the granddaughter and the great granddaughter with their, this is Paul and Veronica Shees. And I warned them in advance that I had made a cardboard cutout of their family because that could really shock you if you walk into a museum and see that. But they were kind enough to pose with them here. And they're a family that kept stuff. So um, the granddaughter here, she brought over like a whole tote bag just filled to the brim with family photos in the house, around the house, documents, like birth certificates, things like that, passports, even the receipts from the boat that Veronica took from Romania to the United States in the 1930s. Like, we've got stuff and it's so exciting. We've scanned it, but haven't really been able to go through all of it yet. But you can see who lived in the house. We have Paul, here he is. They write her name as Verna, but it's Veronica. And then Joseph, who's Paul's brother. And 1940, this is the first time that we have a head of household who was born in the United States instead of in a foreign country. So that's a big moment. And then the work, it's a little more detailed. We know that Paul was working in the tempering shop. Veronica was a pocket setter at the overall factory. That was not the Roebling mill. That was over in Bordentown. Some of you might live there in the apartments now. And then the brother was in the galvanizing shop. And we know that by 1940, the rent is still $13. So it hasn't changed throughout the Depression. So that's who lived in our particular house. But like I said, one of the things we did, and this is an image of the open house, I made a gallery wall of actual human beings who were from Roebling, who lived in Roebling row houses. So all different, some of the other shapes and sizes of row house in different locations, but these people all lived in the same kind of housing. So here we have one of my favorite new stories. I'm still working on the research about her. Mrs. Veronica Ordog, she lived on Third Avenue and she had, I want to say 3 or 4 kids. Uh, I'm sure Madison knows the answer because I made her make the family tree on Mrs. Ordog very recently. But her husband died and she went to work at the mill full time so that she could be the head of household and qualify to continue to live in Roebling in the row house. And this is a fabulous photo of her during her Rosie the Riveter years. And then we have this is Reverend Edmund Alexander. So he lived in a Roebling row house. Some of his children were born over on Railroad Avenue. And you can see this here is a little newspaper article we found in a Baltimore paper. There was a woman in town writing a society column of basically Black Roebling in the 1930s. Amazing. We need to do so much more research, but you can see the networks of who's who, who's going to which churches, who's in town, who's having parties where. But they specifically mention a special Easter service was held at Tabernacle Baptist Church Sunday morning with the pastor, the Reverend Edmund Alexander, in charge. So he worked at the mill and he was the pastor of the Black church in Roebling. And then after that, I believe he was a pastor in Bordentown. Um, so I made a family tree of him, and his granddaughter found me because we have like the Roebling Museum account, and she could see that I was like taking things off her tree. So she reached out and she came over to the museum and she shared this photo and some other really great information about their family. And you can see he's carrying a Bible. That's amazing. Great picture. Here's George. So this is a little mystery we've been trying to solve, and if anyone wants to help us solve it, please. So his name is George Anch, Anch, and this is his employee card. You can see his address here. His address here says 101 Second Avenue. So we have 15,000 of these worker records. This is the only one we've so far found for the house. But if you remember, this is not one of the families I mentioned. So he must be somewhere in between, um, in between those census years, which, allows us to imagine that there were even more people in between renting the spaces. But he looks like a little baby in this photo. He's only 17 years old. You had to be 16 or older to work at the mill. They didn't have child labor at the mill in Roebling. But yeah, he lived in the house, and his dad, if you can see here, relatives and company employee, his dad was the head of household, not him. I didn't scan the back for you guys, but he gets fired a lot. It's great. The first reason he gets fired is because he's a striker. And then they continue to rehire him over and over. It's really, he has 2 cards like this. The whole back is all the jobs he worked at the mill. Hold on, did I miss one? No. Um, okay, so you might have seen if you're a Roebling person or you're on our Facebook, I did a call for deeds and blueprints not too long ago. Because one of the things we learned is that when the company sold the houses in 1947, in order to get a mortgage, certain things need to be happening in the house. So you needed to have like um, indoor heat, central heats, I think is how they phrase it, and a couple of other things before they could sell the properties to the people and get the mortgage for them. So in the deeds, there's little riders that explains what updates they are required to do before they can have the house. So this deed came in from the Ola family, and they, as you can see, lived at 15 Second Avenue. So that's the same kind of house as the one that we bought. And they also brought some family photo albums. Look at this absolutely amazing photo of that mom holding that baby to look at the camera. I can't. And then there's this shadowy man in the background. Um, so beyond just the people, which make this photo amazing, we can also see the backyard. I can see this fence. I could see that it's the kind with the cement and the wood. We can see how the windows are. These look almost like storm windows. We can see the door. We can see, so like this tells us more than just who lived there. We can see architectural details as well. That's why it's important for you to let us scan your photos. Um, well, one of the other mysteries before we get to here is they're using this mortgage company, W.A. Clark. They use them for every single house. So if any of you know about W.A. Clark, let me know. I need to do some deep Googling to find out about them. And then we get to this lovely lady. Some of their descendants are on this call right now. But so this is a family that lived at 27 Second Avenue, so right on the same block as our house, also Hungarian. And this family never threw out anything, and I love it. So they have receipts from the general store up in their attic in their basement. Not anymore because they donated them. Got Hungarian language newspapers, so we can see exact. Like I could guess what the workers are reading in 1919, but this is proof of what they're reading in 1919. Not that I understand it yet. They also brought some family photos, as you see at the top. So this shows us furnishings. Look at that wallpaper, and like we've scanned album after album. So we've been learning a lot about this family. And the woman, the descendant who I've been working with, Cindy, um, she came to our focus groups that we did and about the house and what we should, do there, what the exhibits should look like, whatever. And I told her we really need to see inside the kitchen. I don't know what's in the kitchen. What did the walls look like? And she came over with this amazing photo, a series of amazing, like inside the house photos that, are in the back of the family photo album. You'd never think anyone's going to care. But look at that garbage can. Look at it. Now we know what kind of garbage can we had in Roebling row houses. We can also see some of the cabinets and things like that in the background. So there's so much to learn from your family photos. This is an example of one of the blueprints that we were looking for. So when Roebling sold the houses in 1947, they basically sold the whole town. So once at one point the company owned everything, now they had to split up into different parcels so that individual workers could buy their houses instead of renting them. So these are not like blueprints of, first floor, second floor. They basically show the property lines. And that might be boring to some people. I'd love to have one of each house, but we'll see. And then this is again another one of the deeds, lots of legal language. But what's amazing about this in particular deed, so this is 11 Railroad Avenue. Here's one of those riders I was talking about where you could see that in order to buy property, they had to, it's hard to read because it's right on a crease. Furnish and install new warm air heating system with ducts to second floor. Remove present bathroom partition at rear bedroom and erect a new plaster partition, yada, yada, yada. Furnish and install new 2-part cement laundry tray. Don't know what that is. Sounds important. But all of this really gives us insight into what the houses were like in the 40s, because how else would we know that information? So if you have a deed, let me know. Just want to scan it, you can keep it. The other thing we got from this family, which blew my mind earlier this week when I was making this presentation, it doesn't look like a lot, okay? It's an agreement for renting 11 Railroad Avenue in 1942. But if you look over here, I did like a enlargement. It says exactly what the company was giving the workers with the rentals. So now we know the company wasn't providing furniture. It was BYO stove, which is really actually has been one of my big questions. Like those stoves are so big. like coal stoves, exactly what you're picturing, like wrought iron giant, probably. Like, are people moving those around? Like today when you rent an apartment, what comes with it? You're not, I guess in some places you have to bring your own refrigerator or whatever. But this really, really, this has been, I scanned this probably a year ago, just hadn't looked at it in this detail. So it's really, really amazing. We can also see that in the 40s, they stopped doing painting and repairs and exterior repairs to the properties, which we've heard a lot of people talking about. Like that was one of the benefits of living in the company town. But this is World War II. Maybe they just kind of paused it because of capacity issues. It's hard to know, but this is an amazing, amazing document. All right, I think this is the last one, and one of my favorites. This is a person who lived in one of those fancy row houses up on 8th Avenue. So on eBay, I found 44 diaries written by this lady here. Her name is Mrs. McGrath. And this is her in her car in the 1930s. And you can't really see, but her kid's in the back seat. You do like one of these, you can see on a computer. But behind her are Roebling row houses. So because she wrote every day in these journals, we really get a sense of day to day, like what kind of laundry, what is her laundry schedule, where is she getting her food from. She goes to Trenton a lot to get groceries rather than the general store. So we are also seeing like who she hangs out with, like what is her society up on 8th Avenue. Does she hang out with Hungarians or is she with Swedes and Americans? So it's really, really, really fascinating. We haven't read them all yet, but she writes until 2 days before she dies in 1978. So if any of you want to come over and help me read those, please let me know. She has, as you can see here, she's got really good handwriting too, so it's not that hard to read. But this is one of her little scribbles in the back where she's tracking her monthly expenses. It says per week here. Okay, weekly expenses. I can't be weak though. So it's her rent, gas, electric, and coal she's putting together is $10. Then insurance, milk delivery, paper delivery, church, baker. Virginia's her daughter. I guess she's in some sort of club. I know she was doing dance and piano lessons, I think. Um, Washer, I think maybe she was paying off a washing machine because she certainly wasn't sending it to a washer. And then the gas at the bottom there, that is for car, not for house. So really, really interesting glimpse at, what's going on in the houses in a way that you're not going to find in like steel mill industrial history documents regularly. And that's it. I keep seeing chats pop up, but I can't see them, so I'm really excited. Madison, do you want to come back?
Hi, yes. For some reason, I haven't been able to actually respond to the chats. I can only send it to you as host. But
Ah,
Trish has been answering people for me.
okay,
So,
good.
some of the questions that we have that have not been answered, let me scroll back up. The one somebody asked if the postcards that were shown at the beginning were intended to attract workers to move to Roebling. I would say yes, they were almost like touristy postcards.
Yeah, so we have evidence that the postcards were actually sold at the pharmacy in town. So one of my, I was gonna say guilty pleasures, but I'm not guilty at all about this. I go on eBay and I look for the postcards. We have one of each of the images, but I'm looking for the writing. So who is sending the postcard and to whom? And recently, a lady who lives on 3rd Avenue came over and she found a postcard like jammed up in like under the dashboard of a car and gave it to me. It was really in bad shape, but the message on the back, so it's one of these like produced by the company cards, and it says, I've got a good girl for you down in Roebling. You gotta come over or something like that. So it is just like proving that people were using that as an enticing opportunity. And some of the other ones, we have one that's entirely written in Swedish that was sent to Sweden. So yeah, I think that it was people though, it wasn't the company using them to do the attracting.
Gotcha. Next, Sandy asked, how would employees report maintenance issues when they were renters? And was the company a decent landlord for those matters? I know you kind of touched on it, but if you wanted to elaborate.
Good questions, Sandy Peppers. The It's one of those things that I wish that we had the real estate records, the records from the real estate company, because we do have so many questions like this, especially because I didn't mention it. I forgot to mention it. But like Italians were barred from living in the rental housing in the company town. Black people were able to live in the housing, no Italians, which is like the opposite of the typical story that you're expecting to hear. I'd love to see more about the behind the scenes of who got placed where in the rental units, and then also like we have the rules for renting a house. I should have put that in here. Didn't. But one of it says like you have to let the company know if your toilet backs up or whatever within X amount of days. So there definitely was a process. Do I know what it is? No, but there was a process. The diary writer talks about the company coming over to put up wallpaper in her house. So she does talk about some of that. Like she refers to the guy from the company as Mr. Kemp. And I've heard that in other sources as one of the gentlemen who works in that unit, but also with those employee records that I showed you on the back, some of the workers were employed in the village unit basically, and they were in charge of caring for the houses, the streets, all of that.
Awesome. Next we have a question from Lisa, and it says thoughts on the woman who bought with the diaries. Oh, hold on. I wonder if she brought someone in to do more specialized laundry, ironing, etc. I know both my Hungarian and Italian grandmothers did that in the 1940s.
Yeah, it could be. She had two kids. And the thing that I focus on the most, it's not so much with her specifically because her husband's work was, I'm not going to say it's lighter duty, but it's not like the dirtiest work at the mill. So the people who are living like on second and third, they had those labor jobs where you were like shoveling coal level stuff. So their clothes would have been more than dirty. Like, I don't even know how you would get close to cleaning those if you did. So you could imagine that sort of a thing. You can also imagine that a woman on 8th Avenue would have gotten um, a laundry machine. So that thing that I showed you from the diaries from 1941, I believe. So that's people had washing machines by that point. And we do know that the general store did let you pay weekly to buy things. So you weren't necessarily like owing your soul to the company store, but you could put things on credit. So it could be a mix of all of that. You don't know yet.
Awesome. All right, our next question is from Greg. And this says, is it possible that George Onk or Onch is related to the Och family, like the ACS family that we have in the house? And do the time periods between the census and the worker record overlap?
Um, Great question, Greg. Um, so I went down that rabbit hole, and they don't seem to be related, but like it's so close. And so the people who are doing the job interviews, like the company HR base, that's not what they called it then, the employment office, they were most likely Americans conducting interviews with people who spoke an Eastern European language. So there was definitely a language barrier. So how did those things get written down? Like what was lost in translation? So I absolutely thought about that. And like, problem is everyone in town is named George. Like that is obviously not true, but a lot of the people are named George in town. So, um, having that same name really got me thinking that it could be true. I have not been able to substantiate it. That worker record was also filled out in 1919. So it couldn't be before that. It would have to be after that. But yeah, it's still a mystery, but that is a really good way to think about it.
And we have another question from Greg as well. And this is going off earlier with the handyman in the company fixing things in the houses. Were the handymen hired from within the company to perform house repairs, or were they hired outside and brought in to do this?
They were on the company payroll. I think in Lou Borie's book about town, I think it said that there were at one point like 200 workers on the payroll just to do the upkeep for the town. So that would be a lot of workers. And some, so it'll say on the back, I wish I had one to show you right here. It'll say like department, village, and then sometimes it'll say like job title. It'll be like painter, it'll be like mason, things like that. So we do, in some cases, once those are finished being scanned, I think we could probably pull them all and see what everybody's doing, because we think that the maintenance on the houses changed over time. So they unionized in 1941, and it seems like things taper off after that. We can see from that other document during the war, they weren't listed as doing a lot of the maintenance. And then they sell the houses in 47. So we think like the golden age of company really caring for the properties was probably those earlier years through the 20s, 30s, maybe.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Carol. And well, there's kind of a couple smaller ones. So the first one is, was $13 rent per week or per month?
Month.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So we know from that particular guy that the rent is $13 per week and that he made $1,000 that year. Sorry, did I say week? I meant month.
You
I guess I
said
said
week.
month, right? It's been a long week.
13 per month.
13 per month, he makes $1,000 that year. So if you do the math, one thing we've been able to, and this is a question I get every week, is like, and I think Sandy asked the question, like, were they good landlords? Were they treating the workers fairly? You can see like, so there were other Roebling mills in Trenton. So also row houses. So like same size property, not owned by the company though. These are just regular rental units. But I did a comparison between what you're paying in Roebling to live next to the mill versus what you're paying in Trenton to live in the exact same kind of housing. And the rent is twice as expensive in Trenton. And you just have a regular landlord, no one's taking care of your house, whatever. So they were subsidizing the housing and reducing the rent for the workers in Roebling. So that's in the pro column, I think, for living in the company town.
Absolutely. And kind of going off that, Carol's other question was, if a worker died in World War II, or just, generally because the mill is not necessarily the safest workplace, if a worker passed away, did the widow get to stay in the house, and what did that process look like?
Love that, Carol. So I get this question a lot. Sometimes people, I think it's because there's a lot more like industrial history museums nowadays that you can go and visit, and also family stories. But like we hear with the mining towns that if you died at work, your like corpse was on your porch and you were kicked out 2 days later up in Scranton, things like that, like these terrible stories. Um, but it seemed to have been a lot better than that in Roebling. But we don't necessarily have, like the health insurance handbook from 1910, or, a company document that outlines what happens when you die. Or not that I have laid eyes on. If anyone here has, please send it to me. I am dying to read that. But we do know from newspaper articles that there were some people who tried to pull off a strike in the early 19 teens, and they were kicked out of their houses like within days, and like stuff out on the lawn to make an example of them to keep other people from following and trying to strike. One of the other things I've gotten asked about a lot is, there are, especially with the worker records now that we have those, people retire, they get a pension. Do you have to move out of your house then? That would be really rude, I think, because, and I didn't mention this directly, but a lot of the families married other families. So you'll have like Third Avenue, like all the Romanians in some way are cousins, like down the line. There's a lot, like your aunt will be up this way, your cousins are this way. So having to leave town would have been, rough. It would have been difficult and not ideal. One of the things we've heard in discussing this with people from town and descended families is that in a lot of cases, by the time you are retiring, maybe your son works at the mill, so now he becomes head of household. You can stay in the home. Still maybe 2 bedrooms though. So we're still working on that. It's a really, really great question. And I think people are really interested in how the company treated the workers, and we'd love to learn more about that.
And I also will add, I know we talked about Veronica Ordog earlier. Her husband had passed away, and she ended up, that picture was a picture of her working in the mill. So she ended up taking over that head of household position. Her sons did work in the mill when they weren't out at war, because that did overlap with that World War II time. But yeah, so she did end up taking that position to keep their house as well. So that could have been the case with other families too. Our next question is, where did the children and adults sleep in the houses? I know there were some larger families living in just two bedrooms.
Yes. So in our new exhibit, you can see we have like this whole thing in front of big wall of windows where you can see row houses on the other side. We did kind of the genealogy of those houses and comparing 1910 to 1940. In the 1910, this is before those other houses are built. So the town is much smaller and there was always so much more demand for housing in town. So a lot of people took in boarders. So one of the households, and this is again, 2 bedroom row house, it had 13 people living in it at once. And these are 3 different families. It's not, there were also huge Roebling families. Um, but it seems that everyone had their own approach about how they split up the kids and the adults. There's actually a family in town that lives on Fifth. They have a huge family. I want to say there's 7. Yeah, because I took them in the house and showed them that one family that had like it was 8 people living there, and the kids were like, "That's what we have." I said, "Well, how do you guys sleep? How are you doing it? Who is it? Boy kids in one room, girls in the other, like, and they explained how they do it. Their house is much bigger than the row house on Fifth Avenue. But it was really interesting to see that that's still something that's going on. And every time I talk to someone who grew up in town, I like to ask how they divvied it up. I think sometimes people were living in the basements too, or on the couch in the living room. I think you got creative. Um, yeah.
Definitely a bit of a full house situation in there sometimes, for sure. Our next question is from Melissa, and it is, do you find a lot of family descendants are still in Roebling?
Yes, I heard one of my volunteers say that like a third of the families have ties to town still. A lot of the same names are in Roebling or Florence, which is one town over. I saw also that Melissa asked about the Italians. So the Italians, you were able to work at the mill. Trenton, full of Italians. A lot of Italians worked at those mills in Trenton, but just weren't allowed to be renters in the homes, which is what you're getting at here. Um, we see that Florence has way more Italians living there. It's almost like they moved there because they were able to and commuted one town over to Roebling for work, which is really interesting. I recently found a photo of the inside of one of the steel mill buildings, and they had, like attention, caution, one of those big signs, because, like Madison said, real dangerous, a steel mill. And it was written in 5 different languages. We need to print that up. Remind me, Madison. But I think it's it's really um, we can tell by the last name. Some of them are really iconic. Like even when people walk in the front door of the museum, Madison will be like, "Oh my God, it's the so and so's," and we know their grandparents because we've done research or we read them about them in the company magazine, and then the descendants are showing up. It's really, really great to have a place to go, a museum like ours, especially with these work records. We can do a lot of genealogy research for people too.
Yeah, and I will add the genealogy is one of my favorite parts of the gig. It's very fun to do. You get invested. That seems to be the majority of the questions. I don't see any other ones. If I missed yours, just let me know.
Great.
Uh,
Well, it is 7:30. You got another one? No.
oh no, I thought I did, but it was just a comment. It was just someone saying congrats.
Well, thanks so much, everybody. Like I said, this will be up on our YouTube. If you have any follow-up questions, if you live in a Roebling house and you want me to look up who lived there, I'll do it. But definitely be in touch and come by for a visit. Have a good night. Thanks for coming.